They say you don't miss what you've never known. And maybe that's true. Back in the late 1950s, when I was just a boy in a small Midwestern town, the world was, for all practical purposes, black and white. At least, that's how it felt. The newspapers, the photographs in our family albums, the Saturday morning cartoons flickering on our old Philco set, all shades of gray, with maybe a hint of sepia if the picture, too, was having a good day. Even the world outside in winter seemed to match it. Bare tree limbs scratching at a cloudy sky, snowbanks dull by soot from the coal plant, men in dark overcoats and fedoras hurrying down Main Street. That Philco TV sat like a piece of sacred furniture in our living room, a bulky wooden cabinet with rounded corners and a set of dials that clicked with satisfying thunk. You didn't just turn on the TV. No, you warmed it up. You flipped a switch, hear a faint hum, and then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the image would blossom into view, like a ghost finding its way into the room. There were only two channels we could pull in clearly, CBS and NBC, and if you were lucky and the weather was behaving, you might catch a fuzzy ABC signal if you angled the rabbit ears just right and didn't breathe too hard. Evenings in our house had their own rhythm. Dad would come home from work at the feed mill smelling faintly of grain and machine oil. Mom would already have a supper table set. Roast beef or meatloaf on good days, creamed chip beef on toast if the week had been tight. My sister, Carol, and I would sit through dinner, fidgeting in our chairs, waiting for Dad to finish his coffee so he could turn on the TV. That was our family time, gathered on the couch, a blanket over our knees if it was cold. Sometimes, if the reception went bad, Dad would mutter under his breath, get up and adjust the antenna, a little to the left, a little to the right, until Walter Cronkite's face came back into focus. Outside of television, life moved slower. Kids played in the street without anyone worrying. Store clerks knew your name, and Sunday afternoons meant church potlucks with too many casseroles to count. But still, there was a sameness to it all. Familiar, comforting, but lacking the kind of magic that makes a child's eyes go wide. I didn't know it then, but that sameness was about to change. Something was coming. Something people whispered about in the aisles of the hardware store. Something you'd see an excited glint in the TV repairman's eyes when he talked about the future. The grown-ups called it color television, and even the words sounded like a fairy tale. At that time, I couldn't imagine it. A world where the green of the outfield at a baseball game or the red of a lady's dress could somehow come through the screen. It seemed like the stuff of comic books. But as winter turned to spring, the whispers grew louder, and little by little, the gray world I'd always known began to feel like it was holding its breath. The first real hint that something extraordinary was on the horizon came from Mr. Dunlop, who owned the hardware store on Main Street. He was a tall, thin man with silver hair and a way of speaking that made even the most ordinary news sound like a headline. One Saturday afternoon, while Dad was in the back buying nails, I overheard him telling a customer, "They're saying you'll be able to watch the Rose Parade and actually see the roses, red, pink, yellow, the whole lot of them, not just gray blobs on wheels." I couldn't stop thinking about that. Roses, in color, on television. It was like imagining the moon in your backyard. Before long, the talk spread up and down the street. The barbershop crowd debated it like a political issue. Old Mrs. Whitaker, who lived 3 houses down from us, declared she didn't trust it. Colors on TV? Mark my words, it'll hurt your eyes. Kids at school argued over what it might look like, and more than one claimed they'd already seen it on a visit to Chicago, though I suspected that was just playground bragging. At home, the conversations became more serious. Dad brought home a brochure from a hardware store with glossy pictures of gleaming new sets, RCA, Zenith, Magnavox, each one promising the future in living color. The prices made Mom wince, and I could see Dad doing the math in his head over the mashed potatoes that night. It's not cheap, he admitted, but it's not like they're making more black and white sets. Sooner or later, everyone's going to switch. From that night on, it was as if we'd caught a bug. Every time we went into town, we'd wander past the display window at Dunlop's, where a color set stood like a celebrity on a pedestal. They didn't keep it running all the time. The technology was still new, and half the programming was still in black and white anyway. But when they did turn on, people gathered outside like it was a fireworks show. Our little neighborhood started buzzing with plans. Mr. Carlson across the street announced he was saving up for one, and Mrs. Whitaker's skepticism softened when her cousin in Omaha wrote to say she just bought a color set and was absolutely over the moon. Before long, the question wasn't if you'd get one, but when. Dad finally made his decision in early June. I remember him standing in the kitchen, the evening light streaming in, telling Mom, "We'll have it in time for the 4th of July. That way the whole family can watch the fireworks. In color." Mom smiled in that quiet, knowing way she had, and just like that, the countdown began. The days leading up to delivery felt endless. I kept trying to imagine what it would be like, but my mind always came up short. I'd stare at the muted hues of our living room, the beige sofa, the brown curtains, and wonder how they'd look if they could somehow glow the way the brochures promised. Even the old Philco, humming quietly in the corner, seemed to know its days were numbered. We didn't just plan to watch it alone. No, that wouldn't do. Word spread quickly that on the night we got the new TV, the whole street was invited to our house. It would be the event of the summer, maybe of the decade. And as the big day crept closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to see the world for the very first time. The morning it arrived, I woke up before the sun. The air felt different, charged somehow, as if the day itself knew it was about to be remembered forever. I wolfed down my breakfast, barely tasting the toast and scrambled eggs, my ears straining for the sound of the delivery truck. It was nearly 11 when it came. A squat, rattling Chevy van painted a faded sky blue, with Dunlop hardware stenciled in white on the side. Out stepped two men in brown overalls, each wearing the kind of cap that made them look like they could fix anything. They wrestled the box out of the back, a big, heavy cube covered in cardboard, with this side up stamped in black on every panel. Mom fussed over where it should go, but Dad already had a plan. The old Philco was unceremoniously unplugged and set off to the side, and in its place, the men eased a new set, a gleaming RCA Victor with a walnut cabinet and a screen that seemed impossibly large. There was even a small gold emblem under the screen that read color. It was like having a Cadillac in our living room. I hovered nearby as they unpacked it, inhaling that unmistakable scent of new electronics, a mix of varnish wood, warm dust, and something faintly metallic. The men adjusted the rabbit ears, tested the picture, and left us with a thick instruction manual that might as well have been written in another language. Dad turned to me and grinned. "Well, what do you think?" "I think," I said, my voice trembling with anticipation, "it's beautiful." We didn't turn it on right away. No, Dad insisted we wait until the evening, when everyone could be there to see it. All afternoon, Mom bustled around the kitchen, baking pies and setting out platters of ham sandwiches, while I ran from house to house reminding neighbors. 7 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. By 6:30, the first guests began to arrive. Mr. Carlson brought a jug of his homemade root beer. The Whitakers came with a tin of oatmeal cookies. Even the Thompson kids, who usually kept themselves, showed up with a bag of popcorn still warm from the stove. By 10 minutes to 7, our living room was standing room only, with people spilling into the hallway and leaning into the doorway from the porch. There was a hum of conversation, half excitement, half disbelief, as Dad took his place by the set. "All right, folks," he said, his voice carrying over chatter. "I think it's time." The room fell silent. Dad reached forward, clicked the power switch, and the screen came to life with that familiar hum. For a moment, it was just black and white, a soap opera by the look of it. Then, with a soft flicker and a sound almost like a sigh, the picture bloomed into color. It wasn't perfect. The greens were a little too green, the reds a little too hot. But to us, it was nothing short of magic. The women gasped, the men muttered low. Well, I'll be, us and the kids, myself included, just stood there with our mouths hanging open. I thought I knew what color was. I'd seen it in real life, of course. The blue of the summer sky, the yellow of a school bus. But to see it inside the television, on faces and clothes and streets I'd never visited, it was like someone had opened a window to another world. And the night had only just begun. The first program we watched together was Bonanza. Of course it was. Half the town loved that show already, but in color, it felt brand new. The opening credits rolled. And when the map of the Ponderosa Ranch caught fire and revealed the Cartwrights riding toward the camera, the flames leapt off the screen in shades so vivid they seemed almost dangerous. You could hear a collective murmur run through the room, a sound somewhere between awe and disbelief. Mrs. Whitaker clutched her husband's arm. "Would you look at that green?" she whispered. "Like fresh spring grass." Mr. Carlson laughed. "And the sky, Lord above, I feel like I could walk right into it." Kids sat cross-legged on a rug, their eyes wide as dinner plates. Even the older folks, who had probably seen more change in their lifetimes than they cared to admit, leaned forward, unwilling to miss a second. The colors weren't perfect. Sometimes Ben Cartwright's face looked a little too pink, and the shadows had an odd blue tint, but nobody cared. It was enough to see the red of little Joe's jacket, the golden mane of a galloping horse, the pale blue of the mountains in the distance. For that one evening, our living room might as well have been the most exciting place in America. Between shows, people talked about what they'd like to see next in color. The Rose Parade, of course. Baseball games. The Grand Ole Opry. Somebody joked about the weather forecast being too bright to believe. And through it all, there was laughter, warm, genuine, shared laughter that filled every corner of the house. At one point, Dad leaned over to me and said, "You know, son, I reckon we'll never look at TV the same way again." I didn't answer right away. I was too busy staring at a commercial for laundry detergent, marveling at the blue and yellow box spinning on the screen. But I knew he was right. As the night went on, neighbors drifted home one by one, still buzzing with excitement. Some promised to get their own color sets before summer's out, while others said they'd just come over to our place for the big events. By the time the last guest left, it was nearly midnight. Mom gathered up the empty plates and glasses while Dad stood in the middle of the room, gazing at the new set like it was an old friend he'd just met. "Worth every penny," he said quietly. I went to bed that night with my head full of color. I dreamed of cowboys in red shirts, parades bursting with flowers, and a future where the whole world was just as bright as the screen in our living room. And in a way, I think I knew, even then, that the world had just turned a corner and there was no going back. Years have passed since that night. Decades, in fact. The RCA Victor is long gone, replaced by sleeker, thinner sets, each boasting sharper pictures and sound so clear you can hear the rustle of leaves in the background. Now, you can watch entire movies on a phone small enough to slip into your pocket, and the idea of a black and white television seems almost quaint, like a relic in a museum. But sometimes, when I'm flipping through the hundreds of channels we have now, so many that I can't settle on just one, I think back to that summer evening in 1960-something, when the biggest miracle I could imagine was watching Bonanza in green and gold and red. I remember the smell of Mom's pies cooling in the kitchen, the creak of the screen door as neighbors came and went, the soft of the new set warming up before the picture bloomed into life. I remember the way the room seemed to lean forward as one when the colors finally appeared, the chorus of gasps and chuckles, the glances exchanged as if to say, "Are you seeing this too?" It wasn't just about the television. It was about being there together, sharing a moment none of us had experienced before. It was about the sense that the world was changing, not in some far-off city, not in the pages of a newspaper, but right there in our living room. I've lived through plenty of milestones since then. Man walking on the moon, the rise of the internet, even video calls with my grandchildren halfway across the country. But that night remains etched in my memory, warm and unshakable, because it was the first time I realized that technology can make the world feel bigger and smaller at the same time. Bigger, because it showed us places and things we'd never seen before. Smaller, because it brought us closer together to share in the wonder. Now, when my grandkids come over and sprawl on the couch with their tablets, I sometimes tell them about the night we got our first color TV. They smile politely, the way kids do when they're humoring an old story, but I can see the curiosity in their eyes. They try to imagine a world without color screens, without instant pictures, without the infinite library of videos they carry in their pockets. And I suppose that's the way of it. Every generation grows up thinking their world is the normal one, until something comes along and changes it forever. For me, that change was the night a box in our living room lit up in red, blue, and green for the very first time. I didn't know it then, but I was watching more than just a television show. I was watching the future arrive, one bright, beautiful color at a time.